Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Hi, my name is Francine. I'm an alcoholic. I feel like I'm so little, kind of looking over this thing. I am sort of little, though. 9 o'clock? Is that the meeting's over? Wow. I want to first thank Mike for asking me to be here this evening. It's a real privilege to be invited to share in Alcoholics Anonymous meetings anywhere. It really is. And I want to just say I'm very, very grateful for the opportunity to be here. I also want to say that it was wonderful walking in this room tonight and actually knowing people. You know, it's I've never been to this group before, and I'm only in town about 2 years, and I am amazed at how many people I know in Los Angeles in Alcoholics Anonymous. I am really amazed. I think part of that is because I'm very active, and I go to a lot of meetings. And wherever I go, there's somebody there. So for that, I'm really grateful, too, to walk into a room and have friendly faces. And also I wanted to thank the man who was generous in helping me find this room. I think it was JJ. I want to say thank you for helping me get in here. I was caught in traffic, and I was a little flustered, and thank God for those soothing voices, you know, that just say, take a deep breath, it's going to be okay. So that's what I did. Anyway, I want to say congratulations to those of you that celebrated birthdays. I love being a part of birthdays, and I especially want to say that the woman, Maxine, who took a cake for 22 years, it's important that I see that. If God willing, a day at a time, on Wednesday I'll be 16 years sober, and it's, thank you. Thanks. And it's really important that I realize that sobriety doesn't end at 16. You know, it's important for me to see people with more sobriety than me taking cakes. I love seeing newcomers take cakes. I love seeing a-year birthdays and 5-year birthdays and 10-year birthdays. But it becomes increasingly important at the stage I'm at in recovery to know that recovery continues beyond the place where I'm at. So I want to say thank you for coming up here and just being present and being sober for the 22 years that you are. I want to welcome all of you that are relatively new to Alcoholics Anonymous and say you are in for the most incredible experience of your lives. And I know you don't believe that. I know that if you're anything like I was when I crawled into Alcoholics Anonymous in July of 1979, the last thing you feel is that this is the place to be. It's the last thing. And yet I can tell you, as I stand before you tonight, I stand before you as a walking, talking, breathing example of Alcoholics Anonymous in the flesh. And I can tell you, if you become willing a day at a time to do the things that are suggested in this program, not necessarily by me, but what comes out of our literature, you're going to find that your lives are going to take on the kind of shape that you never thought possible. You just can't even imagine what's in store for you if you're a newcomer. You can't imagine. But I can tell you, while it has not always been a bed of roses for me, I look back over the last 15 plus years of my life and how grateful I am for the opportunity to show up. Just to show up, to be a part of this deal. Just to be a part of it. My story is a story of hope and inspiration for anybody who wants to be inspired. And I can tell you, as I look around this room, I suspect that there are many of you who probably won't identify with anything I have to share. And my story is not for everyone. But if you want a reason to relate to anything I have to say, you'll find it. You'll find it. And likewise, if you want a reason not to relate to anything I have to say, you'll find that too. I mean, I look around this room, and at least half of the room consists of men. So if you're a man, since I'm a woman, I figure there's a reason right there if you want to relate out. I'm a woman And I'm 42 years old, so if you're either over 42 or under 42, there's another excuse for you not to relate to something I have to say. And I don't see that many minorities sitting in this room, so if you want yet another excuse, you know. But I can also tell you, if you want to connect with me, I share from my heart. I always do. And if you want to be touched, I can touch your heartstrings. If your heart is open, and if you want to relate, you'll find something in what I have to share tonight. I was born 42 years ago in Atlanta, Georgia. And I have to tell you, I love saying my age from the podium. I mean, it embarrasses some people that a middle-aged woman should not feel embarrassed about saying her age from the podium. But it's a real big thing for me today. You know, I grew up in an era where women over 30 were put out to pasture. And I got those messages everywhere. Everywhere. Not necessarily at home, but everywhere else. In the movies, in magazines, in books. You opened it up and the women were about this big at about 21 years old. And I always believed that once a woman hit 30, life was over. She might as well roll over and play dead. I mean, she definitely was beyond the childbearing years, so of what use was she? And these are the messages I got when I was growing up as a kid in the 1960s. And I believed, too, that it was impossible for a woman over 30 to be pretty unless she had lots and lots and lots of surgery. And, you know, we live in a town that seems to prove that point a lot. But I am one of those people today because of my role models in Alcoholics Anonymous who show me on a consistent basis how to be proud of the woman I am. And it may not seem much to anybody sitting in here, but for a woman who hated everything about herself, the fact that I can stand before you tonight and be a woman who walks with dignity and who respects who she is truly a miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous. Truly a miracle. My story's about change. It's about willingness to change mostly, but it's about change. I am so different from the woman who crawled into this program in 1979, sometimes I don't even believe it. You know, sometimes when I'm by myself, just with me and my animals, I look at myself in the mirror and I touch me, I pinch me, because I don't believe that I'm real. Sometimes I honestly don't believe that I have actually come from where I've come from and I've done the things I've done and I'm where I'm at today. Sometimes that is so hard for me to believe. Sometimes I honestly think I've made this stuff up. You know, and I suspect when I was new, had I heard someone talk like I share today, I would have said, no way. There's no way that person could have gone through all that stuff. That's the stuff movies are made of. It's the stuff fiction's made of. And yet many of us that sit in this room, or rooms like these all over the world, have those kind of stories. Stories that are impossible, or seemingly impossible. I was born in Atlanta, and I don't remember an awful lot about those very early days for me, other than the fact that as a kid, more than anything else as a child, I remember hating who I was, down to the very marrow of my bones. I hated everything about me. I hated my color. I hated my face. I hated my hair. I hated my body. I hated the fact that I grew up poor in the South. I hated everything about me. And I remember as a kid, I hated myself so much, I used to take razor blades and try to scrape off my skin, and I would use bleaching cream to try to take off my color because I couldn't stomach being in this body. I couldn't stand being who I was. I mean, there were times when I wished I could just unzip my skin and step out because I couldn't stand being the person that I was. I hated everything about me. There was a wonderful television movie that was on about, I guess 6 years ago. I don't even remember. And I often like to allude to this when I share because better than anything I could tell you, this movie describes or explains how I felt as a kid growing up. The movie was Separate but Equal, and it was about the former Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall's efforts to bring forth some kind of change in this country. It was about the Brown v. Board of Education case, which ultimately integrated schools in the United States. And in this TV movie, they were trying to understand the impact of segregation of very small children. So they brought all these little kids together, and they asked them lots and lots of questions. And in responding to a question, they had to choose one of 4 dolls that was put in front of them. They had a little black boy doll, a little white boy doll, a little black girl doll, and a little white girl doll. And they asked them all these questions, and then they came to a little black girl. And they simply asked her to pick out the doll for you that's really ugly. That's all. They said, pick out the ugly doll. And I can tell you without blinking an eye, without hesitating for a moment, this little kid grabbed a hold of the doll. For her, that was the ugliest of all four in front of her. And it was the doll that looked exactly like her. And I can tell you, I had to have been about 9 years sober, 8, 9, 10 years sober. And when I saw that segment, it took me back to my childhood like nothing else had. And I can tell you, quite often when I think about it today, it takes me back to my childhood like nothing else has since. Because I knew exactly how this kid felt. I knew exactly how she felt. I knew what it felt like to hate who I was so much. I knew what it felt like to look at myself in the mirror and despise the image that looked back at me. And with that as a backdrop, it wasn't a surprise that eventually I was going to find something that was going to make that horrific pain go away. Something. No matter what it was, just something to make that gnawing in my gut just disappear. And I can tell you, long before I picked up drugs and alcohol, my very earliest escape in life were books and movies. I loved books and I loved movies. My mother was a librarian, and we used to have lots and lots of books around the house. I mean, in every room, on every wall, there were like reams and reams of books all over the place, and it was fabulous because sometimes I'd take a book off the shelf and I'd sit in a corner all by myself and just start to read. And I wasn't very good at reading as a kid, but I could manage to get inside the book enough to be taken to a different place. And that's all I ever wanted. That's why I drank and used ultimately, because I wanted to go to a different place, because the place where I was at didn't feel good. And you know, when I picked up those books, it worked. I mean, reading worked for me. It managed to take me to a place that was safe and protected. A place that wasn't like the place where I lived, in my own skin, or in my environment in the South Bronx. And it was the same with old movies. I loved old movies. I loved women like Betty Davis and Joan Crawford and Barbara Stanwyck and Susan Hayward. They were my idols. They were women that had a glass in one hand, they had a cigarette in the other hand, and I can tell you they didn't take a whole lot of garbage off anybody, you know? And I was a kid that needed that. I mean, I was this pathetic little kid with this huge hole in her gut. I was just really needy, and I needed that hole to be filled. And at that stage of my life, I was too young to know that the stuff that goes in that hole was love and service and God. I didn't know about that stuff. All I knew is that there was this gnawing in my insides, and I needed to stop the pain. And the books and the movies worked until they simply stopped working. They simply stopped working. And what happened one day, as I'm sure has happened for every single one of us that ever uses anything outside of ourselves to make the pain go away, what happened is, for me with the books in particular, instead of taking me away from the pain of growing up in my own reality, this poor little black kid growing up in the South and ultimately in the South Bronx in New York City, instead of taking me away from that pain, what started to happen is I started to realize that this was my life. Forget the movies, forget the books. That this was the hand I was dealt, whether I liked it or not. And I'm not going to stand up here and tell you that realizing that I then ran right out and started to use drugs and alcohol, because I don't believe that was the case. But I do believe that deep down inside, I realized on a very subconscious level that that was my life, period. That I wasn't going to be anybody else. I wasn't going to be 6 feet tall and blonde. I wasn't going to have big boobs. I wasn't going to look different than the way I looked. That this was my life, like it or not. And what happened for me was that it became really easy to then find something more potent, something stronger to make that pain go away. And the thing I found were drugs. I found drugs and alcohol. And that was easy for me too, because I'm a product of the 60s, and growing up in New York City in the 1960s, it was better living through chemistry. That was the deal. You used chemicals to come up, you used chemicals to come down, you used chemicals to level yourself off. And that's what happened for me. It also was easy because I was an artist. I went to the High School of Art and Design in New York City, and while I was looking for an excuse to drink, I found it as an artist, you know, and I qualify that looking for an excuse because I never needed an excuse. But the fact is, when I was in school, I bought that old notion that the more wasted I was, the more creative I could be. See, I believe that because all these role models of mine, all these artists, all these movie stars, all these painters, the photographers, were all out to lunch. They were all on drugs and booze. And I believed it when they said, if I really wanted to create wonderful pictures, then I had to be out there. And I was really out to lunch. You know, I have to tell you what I've realized since since I've gotten sober, and this is only for me, as everything else I share from this podium, I realized, had I had a crystal ball and been able to look down the road at my life as it was to become, without Alcoholics Anonymous ever being a part of the picture, I mean, had I actually been able to see where I was to go for the next few years as a woman alcoholic, I can tell you I would have never picked up that first drink. I would have never done it. Instead, what would have happened for me would have been what's happened to a lot of young people today. My mother would have come home and found me hanging from the rafters. She would have found my throat sliced or my wrist sliced, because there's no way in the world as a woman who could see where her path was headed, I would have ever wanted to do those things or be in the places where I found myself. No animal should have had to go to the places where I went. And truly, no woman should have had to experience life as I experienced as a practicing alcoholic. But I believe as I stand before you tonight that the God that I have come to believe in only through this program wanted me here for a reason. I don't know why, but that God wanted me here for a reason. And I choose to believe it's because there's one person sitting in this room tonight that needs to hear my story. That's all. And that's all it ever takes is one person. I believe there's one person here tonight who's on the fence, who's come from a place maybe like where I've come from and maybe not. But somebody who needs to know that you can get from this point to this point through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. That you can lead a clean and sober life and productive without the aid of any chemicals. Any chemicals. I believe there's somebody here that needs to know. I think there's somebody in here tonight that needs to know that you can come from the dirtiest place, you can crawl up from the gutter, and you can become the most respectable. There's somebody that needs to know that that's possible. And my story is about that becoming possible. It's about a woman becoming clean all over. When I was first introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous, I remember reading in the big book, in the chapter more about alcoholism, those words, pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. And I can tell you, I remember when I read those words for the first time, there was not one single person in that room that had to sit me down and say, now, Francine, this is what it means. This is what it means to be a woman who feels pitifully and incomprehensibly demoralized. There's not one of you that had to take me aside, and say, that's what it means, Francine. Because you see, as a woman alcoholic, I knew exactly what it meant. I knew exactly what it meant, and I knew exactly what it felt like to be a woman alcoholic. I was a woman who had compromised myself to the point that I didn't even realize what I was doing was a compromise by the time I came to you. I knew what it felt to feel dirty all over all the time. I knew what that unclean feeling felt like. I knew what it felt like no matter how hard I tried or how hard I wished my life were different. I knew what it felt like to consistently feel dirty, like I was sinking in the mire. There were times when I'd come home from doing whatever it was I was doing out in the streets of New York, and I would stand under the shower, and the water would just beat down on me. And for those of you that are real alcoholics, you know what I'm talking about. You know the kind of dirt that I tried to remove that I could never, ever take off my body. I'd stand under the shower, and sometimes I'd scrub, trying to take that dirt away. And sometimes I'd get abrasions on my skin because I'd scrub so hard and the dirt wouldn't come off. It never would come off. Because you see, the kind of dirt I was trying to take off was not that surface dirt, not the kind that comes off with soap and water or pretty clothes or lots of fragrance. It's the kind that's deeply embedded, and when you lie down with scum, that's what you become. That's the kind of dirt I was trying to remove, and it wouldn't go away. It wouldn't go away until I came into Alcoholics Anonymous years later, and you taught me that the cleansing process had to come from inside of me. That it had to come from within me. As a woman, I had to behave differently if I wanted to feel differently. I learned about cleanliness in Alcoholics Anonymous. The kind of cleanliness that comes from different behavior. But for many years, I was still out there living the kind of life that I was living. And, they call alcoholism a disease of perception. And when I was at the end of my drinking, I understood that better than at any other time of my life. Because at the end of my drinking, I had long since seen the poverty that I had grown up in as a child. I had grown up very, very poor, and by the end of my drinking, I was living on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, wearing diamonds and furs, frequenting all the right places, and I was attached to all the right men. I had arrived. So I thought. Because you see, I was dressed differently and the men I was attracting were different. I thought my behavior was okay. My behavior was the same. It was exactly the same on East 58th as it was on 110th and 8th Avenue. But because I was dressed differently, I thought I was somebody special. And although we live in California, in New York in the 70s, if you could get into Studio 54, you had arrived. That was a place that was really a special place where if you could get in there, you could consider yourself someone special. Well, I could walk into Studio 54 attached to the right guy. And I believed because I could that washed that dirt away. Never dawned upon me until I came in here years later that the dirt didn't go away until I stopped acting the way I was acting. In 1978, I was first introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous, and it was at the suggestion of a therapist. And I have to tell you that I wasn't ready to be sober, and that's really the bottom line. She suggested to me that I had an allergy to alcohol, and what I did, and this is the truth, she said allergy, and I ran out and got an allergy test. It is the truth, I tell you. That tells you how sick I was at the end of my drinking. And I'm told from people that they give it exactly the same way today that they did then. It's a big head with 4 little needles, and they prick you to see if there's some kind of allergic reaction, and there wasn't. I wasn't allergic to anything. I mean, if anything at all, I should have been allergic to my bad attitude and my bad behavior, but that didn't seem to be enough to stop me because I was a woman on a mission. And the mission was my own self-destruction. I continued to drink and I continued to use drugs. But I can tell you what happened for me in 1978 was that a seed was planted. And that's why I'm always so grateful when I see people that are drinking and using who still show up in AA meetings. You know, had they said to me when they knew I was drinking, when they knew it, that I couldn't come into this meeting because I was a wet drunk, I might not be standing before you tonight. But what they said to me over and over and over again is, Francine, we just hope that the day will come when you'll want to be sober rather than want to be drunk. And so for anybody who's in this room tonight who's on something, I say, I'm glad you're here. I am so glad you're here. Don't ever let anybody send you out of the rooms. This program is for drunks, whether you be practicing or not. I want to also say, however, if you think we don't know you're on something, think again, you know. That's the deal. I mean, it's not very hard to tell constricted or dilated pupils from healthy pupils, but I believed you couldn't tell, you know, and when I was sitting in the back of the room in those days, I didn't think you could smell vodka, and I didn't think you could tell my eyes were like really in a different place. So we know, but we're glad you're here. But in 1978, that seed was planted because of some people who believed that I had a right to be sitting in that room, no matter what. And at the end of 1978, I moved out to Las Vegas, Nevada, and what I've learned is a geographic. You know, I've learned most of the words I know today from sitting in AA meetings. Most of everything I know, period, is because I'm sober. And that is such a miracle for me. I mean, literally who I am, what you see before you tonight, what you hear coming out of my mouth is Alcoholics Anonymous. And in 1978, I moved out to Vegas because I thought New York was the cause of my problems. And that's what it boiled down to. You know, for those of you that are new and you don't know what a geographic means, it basically means that if you think the problem's over here and you leave here and to run away to go somewhere else, the reality is the problem's going to go with you because we are the problem. We are. And I was definitely the problem in 1978. I left New York because I thought it was New York's fault. It was my mother's fault. It was all those men. They forced me to take all that money. It wasn't my fault. It was my mother's fault. It was everyone else's fault but mine. Everyone else's fault. And I moved out to Vegas, and it took me 9 months before a God that I have only come to believe in since I've been sober just put a stop to the way I was living as I had known it. Just put a stop. In June of 1979, I got hit by a car in a blackout, and I don't even remember today exactly what happened. I don't remember. But what I do recall is when they found me in the street, they didn't think I was going to live. And when they realized I was going to live, they never thought I'd ever walk again. Because when they found me, my left leg was up behind my head, and the bone had come straight through. And today I walk with a limp. I walk with a very unattractive 10-inch scar on my leg as a constant reminder of those good old days. Just in case I ever forget the price I had to pay to stand before you right now. And I can tell you it becomes really easy to forget. It becomes really easy to forget. My life today is so different from the way it was almost 16 years ago, I'm not noticeable sometimes. It is so different. I smell different. I behave differently as a woman. I carry myself different. I dress different. Everything about me is different. My profession is different. Everything is different. Everything. Becomes really easy to forget. And that's one of the reasons why it becomes increasingly important for someone like me to say yes when invited to do service, whether I want to come to another part of town or not, in the traffic on a Friday night. Becomes really easy to say, no thank you, I don't have time to do that. Becomes really easy to say to a sponsee who's calling and needs to talk, I don't have time to talk to you or listen to you tonight. Becomes really easy to say at this stage of my recovery, I don't want to go do a detox meeting. Becomes really easy to be selective about the people I'm willing to extend my hand to. And so every time I look at my leg, I'm reminded of why I'm willing to go to any length for my recovery. Any length for not only victory over alcohol, but why I'm willing a day at a time to go to any length for victory over my attitude. Mostly my attitude. Because I haven't had a drink or a drug in a long time, and I mean nothing. I don't use any chemicals today, period. But those attitudes still creep in there when I let them. Still creep in there when I'm caught off guard. And that's what's showing up here. That's what doing service allows me to do. Combat those bad attitudes. Else I find myself, like many people I see with more time than me, who, if not drinking, in this program, wishing they were. Wishing they were. Or using some kind of chemical to just ease the pain a little. One day at a time, that's not how I choose to live my life. But it's only because of the work I'm willing to put into my recovery that I get those kind of rewards back. In 1979, when I came in here, I can tell you I didn't want to be here. I didn't want to be here. I came into Alcoholics Anonymous from the very beginning, and I had a bittersweet love affair with this program. It was wonderful on one hand because for the first time since I had gotten hit by that car, I could honestly share with people what happened. Because up until that point, I was lying. I told people I fell downstairs, and who knows if they really believed me or not. They acted like they did. But when I got sober, I could tell you the truth. I could say I was hit by a car because I was drunk. I can't tell you how freeing that was for somebody like me who had lived with secrets, all kinds of secrets throughout my entire life, all kinds of secrets. And to be able to come in here and tell you the truth about where I was at that moment was incredible. It was incredibly freeing for this alcoholic. But as much as I loved being able to share that, and as much as I needed this program, I didn't want to be here. I didn't want to be an alcoholic, and I definitely didn't want to be here. And no amount, well, my broken leg was not enough in the beginning to make me want to be here. Let me just say that. And for those of you that are real alcoholics, you know that no mere car accident is going to stop you if you want to keep killing yourself. And it didn't stop me. I continued to drink and use for another month and a half after my accident until July, the end of July 1979. And then something happened for me. And I think what I like to call it is that moment of clarity. That's what I think it is for me. It was a time for me when I just came to one day and I wanted to live more than I wanted to die. That's really what it was. It wasn't anything more complicated than that. I wanted to live more than I wanted to die. I picked up the phone and I called Alcoholics Anonymous in Las Vegas. And I told them I couldn't drive. I didn't know how to drive and I was on crutches, but I wanted to go to a meeting. And I asked them if they could send somebody to pick me up. And the woman, who was really kind, and I don't even remember who she was other than the fact that she was kind, and she said to me, "We can't get anybody to pick you up right now, but if you just hold on until tomorrow, I promise we'll have someone take you to a meeting." And I suspect that this God I didn't even believe in at the time knew I wasn't going to survive another day. I really believe that it was an act of providence that took over at that moment for me. And what happened, a few hours later, I got a telephone call from a woman who lived in the complex right next door to mine. And she said, "Francine, if you'd like to go to a meeting, I'd be more than happy to take you." And I pray to God that that was my last first meeting in Alcoholics Anonymous. I pray to God I never have to test it again. Because you see, I'm one of those people that doesn't believe I have I don't believe I have another recovery, but I don't believe I have another full drunk. See, the kind of drinker I was really foul-mouthed. I had a bad attitude from the word go. And I honestly believe that if I were to pick up today, if I didn't take my own life, someone else would. Because now armed with a little AA information and a drink, it's like, look out. So they'd get rid of me but quick. They would, you know. But I don't want to find out if that would work. So I do what I need to do one day at a time to stay real close to you guys. To stay real close. One of the two women who were my role models when I first came in this program, or who were my initial inspirations, one of them went out after 16 years. And she still hasn't been back. She still hasn't been able to get back in this program. She was a major circuit speaker, and she has not been able to get back in this program. And I see examples like that all the time around me. All the time. And it reminds me of why I'm willing to go that extra length. Because I know how powerful the ego can be, whether you're 5 years sober or 10 or 20. I haven't had a drink or a drug since then. And my life has changed drastically. My first 2 years were horrendous, and all I can say is that they were miserable because I was unwilling to do the work that was necessary in Alcoholics Anonymous. Oftentimes I'll hear people talk about those terrible twos, and I can tell you from me it wasn't about the terrible twos. My first 2 years of sobriety were miserable because I was not willing to do the things my sponsor suggested I do. Instead, what I did was I hung out in bars at 2 years sober and I drank Perrier. I continued to sleep with other people's husbands, and I continued to sleep with other people's boyfriends and justify that it wasn't their husband. At 2 years sober, I was dressing like a whore and I was acting like one. And I couldn't figure out for the life of me why I couldn't stand living the way I was living. I had a sponsor, thank God, who I met very early in my recovery, who never stopped talking about action, gratitude, service, and God. And one of the major things Louise talked about from the very beginning was that self-esteem comes from doing esteemable acts. Self-esteem comes from doing esteemable acts. She said to me, Francine, if you act like a whore, you're going to be treated like one. If you dress like a hooker, that's the way you're going to be responded to. She said, if every other word out of your mouth is a 4-letter word, then don't be surprised if that's what you get back. That self-esteem comes from doing esteemable acts. She said, one day at a time, if you want to feel differently about yourself as a woman, then you need to act differently. And you know, I didn't like anybody when I got sober. I didn't like men and I didn't like women, which was a surprise to most people that I didn't like men because I was never without one. But the real surprise was that I couldn't stand women. It was a surprise to me. I hated women. And it was because I hated myself so much. You see, I saw you guys, or I saw me and you. I was not trustworthy. I could not be trusted as a new woman in this program and as a drinking woman. And I believed every single one of you were like me, that you couldn't be trusted. And those of you that could be trusted, I didn't trust you anyway, because the women who would get up to the podium and say, just for today, I behaved differently, I didn't want to hear about that. I didn't want to hear about women who weren't sleeping around and acting out, because you made me take a look at myself. I didn't want that. I liked the girls who were like me, who hung out on the side of the room and who took inventory, who wore dresses up to their navels, their blouses down to their navels, and who slept around. I liked them because they didn't threaten me. They didn't make me look at myself as somebody who was behaving inappropriately. And yet I can tell you, when the day came for this alcoholic woman to change, the women that I clung to, the women who I wanted what they had, were the women in Alcoholics Anonymous who became willing a day at a time to behave differently. The women who were proud to get up to the podium and say, just for today, I don't sleep with somebody else's husband. Just for today, I don't sleep with anybody else's boyfriend. And just for today, I dress appropriately for the occasion. It's women like that that taught me how to behave. It's women like that that I use as role models today in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm grateful for them, as I'm grateful for the men in Alcoholics Anonymous who did not try to pick me up when I was a newcomer. I thank and celebrate those men who allowed me to get sober, who didn't want what I had under my skirt, who just wanted to help me stay sober. And today, the men I have the most respect for are the ones that just allowed me to get sober. The ones that allow newcomer women just to get sober. And that's how it happened for me in the beginning. I came in, I fought it, but I became willing eventually to do what was suggested. That same sponsor who believed that self-esteem comes from doing esteemable acts, she believed that applied across the board. And what happened for me when I was 2 years sober is I started to realize that as the insides were changing, my outsides were yearning to change as well. And at 2 years sobriety, I found myself a high school dropout and being kept, which had always been my MO. And at 2 years sobriety, I decided I no longer wanted to be someone's mistress, that I wanted to be a woman of substance, that I wanted to be self-supporting through my own contributions. And in 2 years sobriety, I made a decision to go back to school to pursue a career that was going to require about 10 years of a commitment. And I can tell you, I couldn't spell commitment and I couldn't define it. But I knew enough about taking baby steps, about taking actions to move in the direction I wanted to be. And I had this sponsor who believed that self-esteem came from doing esteemable acts. Because of the time, I just want to say it took me 10 years in this program, but I went for a dream, and Alcoholics Anonymous gave me the tools to make it happen. When I was 2 years sober, I made a decision to become a lawyer. I became willing to do everything it took to make that dream come true. And in 1991, I was admitted to the New York bar. And I can tell you, it might not affect anybody in this room the way it affects me. But for a kid who used to pay lawyers an awful lot of money to keep her out of jail, it was incredible that I was admitted to anybody's bar. Incredible. You know, and I share that, number one, because it's a part of my story, but also because, you know, I am one of those people in my recovery that dares to dream. I am one of those risk takers because I'm a dreamer. Alcoholics Anonymous taught me that it's not about where I've come from. It's not about what color my skin is. Not about what I don't have. But it's about where I'm going. And it's given me dreams one day at a time in this program and provided me with incredible tools to make those dreams come true. I want to also say, because, you know, it's easy to tell you that this is what's happened and end it right there. But the reality is, I didn't get to that place, or I haven't gotten to this place without a lot of struggle. And I want to share that in particular before my time is up, because I believe that there are newcomers in this room, maybe who are like me, maybe who have a little flicker of a dream inside and who just want to do something with their lives. Maybe it's go back to school. Maybe they want the courage to get out of an unhealthy relationship that's killing them. Maybe they want to just move to another apartment. Who knows? Maybe they want to do things that they never thought they possibly could do. And maybe by hearing a story like mine, they might at least believe that the possibility exists for them to do it. It took me 3 tries before I actually passed the New York bar. I took it and I failed it, and I took it and I failed it, and I took it and I passed it. And the gift in all of this is that I kept taking it. I kept taking it. Because you see, I have always been one of those people who sat back on the sidelines taking the inventory of the people who tried. And I laughed and I made fun of them because I never had to worry about doing anything. I never had to worry about it because I was too scared. I didn't have the guts to go for anything I really wanted. It was easier to sit back on the sidelines and judge the doers. I became willing a day at a time to get in the game. And getting in the game meant taking a test again and again and again and again. One of the greatest gifts of my recovery is my willingness to be a part of my own life. The fact that I'm an active participant in the creation of my own life today is one of the greatest gifts you've given me. When I was newly sober, I was invited to make a list of all the things I wanted out of my recovery. And on that list, you would have found a litany of every single material thing that I lost. You would have found fur coats and diamond rings and kitty cats and stereos. That's what you would have found. You would have never once found the things that I value the most. Those intangible things today that you can't take away from me. Things like self-esteem. The genuine kind of self-esteem that comes not from being attached to the right man, but the kind that comes from my own accomplishments. The kind of self-esteem that comes from me taking a baby step, walking through fear and getting to the other side. That's the kind of self-esteem that you've allowed me to have today. That you would find on my list. On my list, you'd also find courage. Courage. I mean, I'm one of those people that keeps showing up today, despite the odds. I use the faith that I've been given to walk through the fear. Most of the time I'm afraid. But I have smart feet and I have a faith that works under all conditions. And it just gives me the courage to put one foot in front of the other to get to that other place. What you'd also find on that list today is discipline. And if you're anything like me, discipline was a really nasty word. I did not like that. I was not one of those people that was into deferred gratification. I didn't want to wait. I didn't want to wait for anything. I wanted it yesterday and I wanted it on demand. And one of the gifts for me today, quite honestly, although sometimes I question whether it's really a gift, and that is my willing to be disciplined. You know, I'm one of those people that just keeps taking the steps. Sometimes I haven't even seen a light at the end of my tunnel. Sometimes there are days when I'm just doing it because that's what I know I'm supposed to do, to get to this other side. I just take the action because that's what you've given me in this program. It took discipline for me to put myself through school for 10 years. Someone who was as lazy as I have always been. Someone who relied on, the men I dated were lawyers and doctors. I never in my life thought I could be one. Never in my wildest imaginings thought I could do something with my life. That took discipline. Discipline that you gave me in Alcoholics Anonymous. But what you really find on that list today for me is God. The greatest gift that I have been given in my years of sobriety has been a faith that works under all conditions. More than any other gift, that has been the most special. Because it has been because of that God that not only have I been able to stay sober for almost 16 years, but I've been able to turn my life around in a way that is so incredible. You see, people like me don't get to be where I am today, but for Alcoholics Anonymous, it doesn't happen. Women who have come from the places I've come from don't get to do the things I do today with my life, but for Alcoholics Anonymous. I would like to close by reading something from conference-approved literature, just in case there are any AA purists in this room tonight. This is my most favorite book. I'm a book baby. I got sober through the 12 steps and through the literature. And it's just from myself. I have not found it necessary to seek any outside approval or any outside assistance to stay sober one day at a time. I've come in here. I kick cold turkey in the rooms, and I've done everything right here. And one of the major tools that I found for myself that works, that really works, is the literature. And I always like to end my talks with this particular passage from As Bill Sees It, and sometimes it's called AA Way of Life. It's in a red and white cover often. And what it is, they're pieces from different AA literature, different other books in this program, and they've categorized it. And I remember in the very beginning, my sponsor suggested that I read this book, and she told me I should read everything under resentment and anger, because my face was literally always in a pissed off position, you know. And then she suggested I read everything in this book under action and gratitude. And I thought, oh my God, you know, give me a break. And yet, with that kind of defiant attitude, I started to do it, and something happened for me. Eventually, the thing that happened is I fell in love with this book as I've fallen in love with Alcoholics Anonymous. And this passage is on page 4, and it's called, Can We Choose? We must never be blinded by the futile philosophy that we are just the hapless victims of our inheritance, of our life experience, and of our surroundings. That these are the soul forces that make our decisions for us. This is not the road to freedom. We have to believe that we can really choose. And that's what you've given me in the years that I'm sober. You've given me the gift of choice. You've taught me that it doesn't matter where I've come from. It doesn't matter whether I have a religion or I don't. It doesn't matter what color my skin is. That the only thing that matters in the overall scheme of things is where I'm going. What I do with my life. How I live my life today. How I treat you. You know, and what you've asked of me during the course of that time. All you've ever asked of me is that I always be willing to pass it on. That I always be willing to give it away. And for that, I'm so grateful. Thank you.
Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.